Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hazards in the Museum Victoria Library. So here today joining us, we have materials scientist, Dr. Rosemary Goodall, and library manager, Hayley Webster. And I'm Paige Wright, and I'm the events manager for Untitled, and I'm from the University of Newcastle. So Dr. Rosemary Goodall from the Museums Victoria is involved in the identification of material and collections with a primary focus on the identification of hazardous substances utilizing elemental and vibrational spectroscopy. Recent research includes heavy metal pigments in book covers, mercury vapor in collection cabinets, pharmaceuticals, plastics, polymer coatings, and dark poisons in the museum's collections. Hayley Webster is the manager of the Museum's Victoria Library, which includes a rare book collection specializing in natural history. Hayley is an advocate for professional development within special collections librarianship and is currently the Victorian representative for Alia Rare Books and Special Collections. Her research interests include the history of the Museum's Victoria Library, rare natural history books, book history, special collections, and queer history. So today, Rosemary and Hayley will be talking to us about a project to identify heavy metals in pre-1900 book bindings in the Museum's Victoria Library. The talk will outline the context of the project, touching on the history of book bindings, give an overview of the testing approach and results, and finish with a discussion of the implications for library practices. Now, while Hayley and Rosemary are presenting, I just ask everybody to please keep your Zoom on mute, and when we're finished, when Rosemary and Hayley are finished presenting, we'll do a Q&A, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. You can also put your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll read out the questions at the end. So over to you, Hayley and Rosemary.
Great. Thank you, Paige. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm presenting to you from today, the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Today, Rosemary and I will present on a project to test for heavy metals in the museum's Victoria Library. I will provide an introduction, and then Rosemary will take you through the detail of the project. Our current hazard testing project was initiated after we became aware of the Poison Book Project, which is run out of the Winterthur Library in the US. The Poison Book Project was originally concerned with Victorian-era cloth publishers' bindings and the identification of arsenic-based pigments commonly found in the popular emerald green fabrics of the period. The project has subsequently branched out to cover toxic substances in 19th century cloth-bound books more generally. At Museums Victoria, we have extensive experience in monitoring and managing hazards, and we have been surveying the collection for heavy metals and other hazards for over 10 years. Additionally, we have developed documentation and safe handling procedures to guide our work in this area. Museums Victoria is a multidisciplinary organisation with over 17 million collection items from across the sciences, history and technology, and First Peoples collecting disciplines. In addition to that, we have the paper-based collections of the library and the archives. Therefore, our hazard testing program is conducted across a wide range of materials. At the outset of the project, we were aware of the use of arsenic-based pigments in wallpaper and books, and Rosemary had done some testing on both books and wallpaper in the history and technology collections. However, this project is the first in our organisation to investigate library materials for hazardous substances. The Museum's Victoria Library is a heritage collection founded in 1854. It was founded as a working library for 19th century museum scientists. However, it is still developed today, and our collection spans publications from the 17th to 21st centuries. The library consists of around 40,000 titles and includes a rare book collection of 1,000 titles or 2,000 volumes. Pre-1900 bindings can be found throughout our library collection, including our rare book collection, which has the highest concentration of historic bindings, but these can also be found throughout our general collection of books and journals. The library's history as a working collection means that many of the bindings are well worn. Our books have been used alongside specimens in the lab and have sometimes been taken out into the field. I will just briefly turn to the history of book bindings in order to provide some context for Rosemary's discussion of our project. Our library's historic books date from the 17th to 19th centuries and are bound in a European or Western tradition from the handpress period to the industrial period. The handpress period refers to books produced from the mid-15th century to the early 19th century, when the various elements of book production were made by hand. In this period, books were often sold as unbound sheets, and bindings were created by sewing these together and attaching boards to the front and the back of the text block. The boards and spine would then be covered, most often in leather, as you can see from the two examples on the screen. However, they could also be bound in other materials such as fabric or paper. Books were sometimes issued in temporary paper wrappers from the 16th century in Italy and spreading to other parts of Europe and England in the 17th and 18th centuries. Bindings in the handpress period were often made to order by the owner and may have been bound to match a personal library. However, books could be sold already bound or with a choice of bindings available to the buyer. Bindings varied in terms of cost and luxury and could be made from more affordable materials such as sheepskin with very simple design features, or they could be made from expensive leather such as goatskin and have gold tooling or other elaborate decorative techniques applied. Many bindings were made from calf skin. The binding you can see on the left is a tree calf binding, which is a high-end binding mainly used in the Netherlands in the late 18th century. On the right is a cat's paw binding, which was popular from the late 18th century. Both of these styles have been achieved by using acid to pattern the leather. As the book trade industrialised from the early 19th century, books started to be issued with pre-made bindings, and the responsibility for binding shifted from the owner to the publisher. This led to experimentation and changes in bookbinding practices. One change was that covers began to more clearly represent the contents of the book. You can see this in the two examples up on the screen. Prior to this, although bindings could be decorative and even pictorial, the outside appearance of a book was usually unrelated to a book's content. Textiles have long been used in book bindings, but in the 1830s, cloth bindings became increasingly popular with publishers as a more cost-effective material than leather. Book cloth, or buckram, was invented in the 1820s and was commonly used by the 1840s. The development of standard publisher issue bindings with appealing decorative covers led to experimentation with colourful dyes to create eye-catching covers that would attract buyers. Prior to industrialisation, many pigments were created from natural mineral substances. However, in the 19th century, inorganic pigments were increasingly used, and these could contain toxic substances such as arsenic, lead, chromium, and copper. Coloured book cloth was made by treating the fabric firstly with a clear starch paste and then with a coloured starch paste. This could be applied in multiple layers to achieve the desired level of colour saturation. Each layer of starch paste was dried before the next was applied. The paste was pressed into the fabric by rollers to create a smooth surface. Sometimes this involved stamping designs into the surface, as had previously been the practice with leather bindings. The Poison Book Project took these Victorian cloth bindings as a starting point for their research, and they were particularly interested in the vibrant green covers which have been found to contain arsenic. They found that these arsenic-based pigments did not fully bond to the fabric through the colouring and drying process, and over time, this has led to the surface becoming friable. This means that toxic substances can be more easily disturbed and transferred to other surfaces or to readers of these books. We started our project by looking at green covers for arsenic too. However, as you will see, we have expanded that to include heavy metals generally. I'll now hand over to Rosemary.
Thanks, Hayley. Hi, everyone. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am presenting today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. As Hayley said, the library is a new area of investigation for us, and we started off focusing on arsenic-based greens. Emerald green is the term that I will use today, but the copper acetoarsenite pigment we're talking about has many names. It was created in 1808 in an attempt to improve on Hayley's green and came into common use around 1814. It was used in wallpaper, clothing, cloth, sweets and their wrappers, and of more interest to us in book cloth. As Paris green, it was also sold as a pesticide. Although it's a more stable pigment than Hayley's green, it can react with sulfur in the air and darken, turning brown. Hence, many of the books with emerald green covers have brown spines where they've been exposed to light and air. What I knew from previous testing on books and paper items was that there were multiple other heavy metals used in pigments on these materials. So I always record everything that I find. And as I progressed through the rare book collection, it was evident that these other pigments were present on the books as well. So I widened the testing to include books of different coloured covers. Chromium is present in green and yellows. Mercury, predominantly from the red pigment, vermilion, is present in multiple colours, book covers. And lead in particular is very common and can be present as lead white, lead red, lead chromium yellow, and as a drying agent in conjunction with both pigments and dyes. We're fortunate at Museums Victoria to have access to both a portable XRF spectrometer and a transportable Fourier transform infrared spectrometer. The XRF in particular has been extremely useful in this project for identifying heavy metals. X-ray fluorescence provides information on the elements present. In this case, it doesn't tell us how much is present, but we can identify that arsenic is present, but not how much or what type of compound. Although if copper is also present, the chances are that it will be one of the copper arsenites that we're talking about. Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy can be used to identify the compound used. In this case, example here, the copper acetoarsenite. The drawback with infrared in the setup that we've got is that it can only identify it if you have enough of the compound present. In the case of most big book covers, the compound is tightly bound to the cover, and so there's not enough for us to pick up with the infrared. Other institutions have used Raman spectroscopy to detect, and if you use the microscopic technique, then you can pick up small particles and grains in the book cloth. We have been fortunate in that so far we have not found any of the heavily pigmented buckram covers coloured with emerald green. We have, however, identified green paper layers and covers that are coloured with emerald green. And we have found these green underlayers, you can see in this image, on 2 sets of books, both French, The Voyages to the South Pole in this example, and 21 volumes of The Natural History of Fish by Cuvier. Both of these books fit into the time frame of emerald green found by the Poison Book Project, where the majority of books were published between 1840 and 1860. In all, I found 9 books in the rare book collection with arsenic in the covers. In the paper layers in these examples, in a green cover, and in green and brown leather covers. Given the time period of some of these books, I think it's unlikely that they're emerald green, as I commonly haven't found copper with these. You should still take care handling these books, as the arsenic present will probably come from other pigments such as arsenic yellow or pigment. But further analysis is required to confirm this. Hayley, can we go back 1 slide? Thank you. Emerald green pigment was used for green paper covers, particularly like this one we have identified. Generally, it's a lighter, mintier green rather than the strong blue-green of the buckram covers. A dry Tyvek white over the surface of this book removed a small amount of green residue and tested positive for arsenic. This shows how loosely bound the pigment is in the paper. And we're in the process of upgrading the storage for this book and to ensure the safety of our staff. Yesterday, I found 1 more paper cover, a very faded green back cover on one of the books in our main library, and it's also tested positive for arsenic. Looking at the survey results, this graph gives the number of heavy metals identified on the book covers in our rare book collection against the time period. I've not included lead, as these are found across the 19th century, and out of the 197 book covers I tested, 195 tested positive for lead. As you can see, we've only found a limited number of arsenic paper and books, and these are limited to 1840 and the 1840s and the 1860s. Mercury has been identified up to and including the 1870s and is commonly found on marble paper covers and with a few other coloured buckram covers. Chromium is found across the 19th century. Earlier in the 19th century, yellow chromium pigment was mixed with blue pigments to create a green cover. And after 1860, chromium-based green pigments were created and became more common and were used through the latter half of the century. We have now done further testing in our journal collection and in our main library collection and found similar distribution of pigments in those collections as well. Mercury has been found predominantly in marble book covers, paper covers, as I said, but also in some red, purple and blue cloth covers. In our collection, it is found throughout the 19th century, as I said, up to the 1870s, and then it drops off. It was found in this blue-black marble cover on volumes by Cuvier, which also have the green arsenic-based paper liner. And when you look closely at this cover, that you can see that there's also some red in the marbling. The most common coloured marbling that we found mercury in is obviously red from the vermilion. This marble paper coloured is coloured with mercury. But when you look at the infrared spectra, also note that there's really high bands there for lead as well. It just shows the amount of lead that's present. even in the paper covered books. The chromium-based green pigments come in a range of colours. You can see the first book on the left is typical chromium green. It's a duller blue-green, but it can come in much lighter colours, such as the bright one in the middle and the yellowy green on the right-hand side. The central book has also been rebound, and it appears to be a copy of the popular emerald green cover with gold stamping, which can cause some confusion when you're surveying the collections. Don't let the small chromium peak in the spectra on this confuse you. The way our instrument is set up, it is focused on the region of the lead, mercury and arsenic peaks. So chromium always appears smaller, but the actual level of chromium in this is probably in the percent range. Chromium, although less toxic than arsenic, is a known carcinogen and is still a hazardous compound. Wipe tests that I've conducted on the chromium covers, however, have come back negative for chromium. So it's promising that the pigment appears to be more tightly bound to the surfaces than the arsenic and the mercury pigments. Chromium-based yellows also come in a broad range of colours. I've identified chromium on both buckram and paper covers. And you can see here it comes from a very light yellow to oranges and brown. Wipes that I've done on these, as I said, I'm not getting chromium back, and for the majority of the book covers, I'm not getting very much pigment or heavy metals on the wipe tests, mainly just the arsenic ones. I've also carried out some wipe tests in our collection cabinets on the shelving around some of the heavy metal based books, and these have come back negative except for some very, very low traces of lead, which may be due to other sources. These are the Museum Victoria guidelines for how we handle the books. They apply to our collections and our circumstances, but we're happy to share this information with you, but do recommend that you assess your own situation and implement practices that are applicable to your collections. We're recommending that we wear nitrile gloves or similar non-porous gloves when handling the books. And when you are handling the more friable, particularly arsenic-based books, to wear a P2 mask. And any interventive work that we do with books would be carried out in a fume hood. And of course, personal hygiene is critical when you're handling books of this type in the collection. Thanks, Hayley. Hayley, you're still muted. Sorry.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, we may move on to questions now, but by way of conclusion, we're aware that this topic has generated a lot of interest among professionals in museums and libraries. And yeah, we know that other institutions are looking to conduct similar testing or have already begun to do testing. And yeah, we are interested to hear about your testing and the results as well. But yeah, for now, we just thought we would open up to some questions. I will just maybe put up on the screen some more information about the Poison Book Project, which you can have a look at while we're doing some questions. So yeah, Paige, maybe I'll hand back over to you.
Okay, great. Well, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your cameras. You can ask a question over the camera or pop it into chat. Any questions? Don't be shy.
I have one. It's Julie Sommerfeld.
Julie, can't hear you very well.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm manager of rare books and special collections at the University of Sydney Library, and we were a few years back. We were donated a book. It's a herbal, 17th century, published in 1636, and it's actually bound in parchment. We were doing some analysis on some annotations in the book, so nothing to do with checking out the cover, but it actually turned up results showing that it has arsenic on the cover, but it's parchment. It's not coloured parchment, just plain parchment. I wonder if there's any research or literature out there about heavy metals in parchment bindings.
I haven't seen anything on parchment bindings. No, I have found arsenic traces in paper, and that's come from the paper processing methods. That there is trace arsenic. In fact, I think the paper processing companies are now taxed with removing any trace of arsenic from their systems. But I haven't heard of it on parchment. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks. But you'd recommend the care and handling guidelines be the same?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're finding arsenic in those, it's possible that it's contamination from other pigments or use. I do suspect some of our books may have contamination on them from being used in the collection stores near our collections that have heavy metals on them.
I can see Anna is saying in the chat that it transfers so easily. It's possible it could have been transferred onto the parchment by whatever it was sitting next to on the shelf. So that's possible.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. We have another question from Katrina in the chat. Have you done any wipe tests on the bindings which have mercury as a pigment?
Yes. Yeah. On the paper marbled covers, I've got very, very low traces of mercury on the wipes, but on the bound book cloth, I have so far not got any mercury on the wipes.
And Andrew Henry has a comment. It's often found in animal skins. I believe he's talking about the arsenic.
Yes, yeah. Early animal skins were treated with arsenic as a preservative and pesticide.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Diane.
Can you hear me? I haven't been able to turn my camera off. I didn't know how to do that, so that's why I'm sitting here. Is it possible? I work in a school library, but I also do book repairs. So I've done everything down to the 1700s. And I was wondering, how do I only work from home? How do I know, is it possible for me to get wipes to wipe things to see if they're dangerous, or do I just take precautions and hope for the best?
There are commercial organisations that will test wipes for you. I mean, I personally use Tyvek wipes because I can also use them on my infrared spectrometer, but just a cotton bud type wipe is sufficient to send off to organisations. The AICCM website has contact details for people who can do that sort of consulting for you.
But there's no way of just, so I've got a book that's got red marbling on. How do I know whether to get it tested or not?
I would say if it's, well, yeah, it's a difficult one because not every red marble book cover that I've tested is tested positive for mercury. I would just, I would think the worst and assume that it has got vermilion and just wear gloves.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Opened my eyes. I knew about the prison book project, but I hadn't heard about the other, hadn't thought about the other heavy metals.
Yeah, well, they're also continuing on with other metals now. They've got quite a lot of information on their website about chromium pigments now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Diane. Thanks. Yeah, it just goes to show, doesn't it? Safety. You know, you can't be too careful with these older books. You don't know what you could be exposed to. So
yeah.
Yes, and people are like send them to me in the mail to get repaired, but they've had them on their shelf as well. So it's you know, just the old book in the back of the cupboard could be dangerous.
any other questions? Anybody else have any comments? Anything that surprised you?
Has there been much research done into the, I guess, the significance of the health impacts of handling a book that has arsenic or similar in it? You know, what is sort of the impact of that if it's, say, in the collection and you only handle it once a year? What sort of happens from there?
I mean, that's not an area that I'm a specialist in, so I haven't, I'm not aware of any studies specifically on that. But small quantities of arsenic can be quite dangerous in the long term, but it's more about the risk factors and the number of times you're exposed and the quantity that you're exposed to with all these things. Obviously, the green book bindings that we were very concerned about and checked our collection for, the concern with them is that because there's such a lot of arsenic on the cover and it is quite friable, that any minor exposure could be quite risky. But with a lot of the other things that we found, it's been quite small quantities.
Rosemary, you managed for that, or you were saying for that green book, you were looking into other housing for it. What are you going to be doing for that very, very poisonous book that you found?
Well, it currently, that decision is with our book conservator, Belinda, and she's currently on leave. So at the moment, we've got it housed in its own, sorry, I can never remember the right term, the cardboard box, you know, the conservative conservation safe sort of cardboard box. And that is currently housed inside a plastic tote. And we've got hazard labels over. So Belinda is going to be looking at how to house that safely for the book and for us. I know the Poison Book Project are recommending, if you've got nothing else, to just store them in plastic bags, Ziploc bags, so that you don't get that initial contact when you pick it up.
If I might just add as well, like partly it's about raising awareness. So like in our collection, one of the things that Rosemary's been doing is adding labels to things that have hazards. So you can approach that with more thought. So yeah, it's sort of about more than just, yeah, like, yeah, more than just identifying it, but what you do next, you know, and how you work with the collection, whether that's gloves, whether that's labeling, whether it's, you know, removing things from the collection or isolating them. Yeah, there's a whole range of things that you can do to reduce risks to either the people that work with the collection or the users of the collection.
I had another question. Since embarking on this, have you had anybody request a book that you knew to be poisonous, and how have the clients taken the news?
I don't think we've had that happen yet, because we started testing. It's been more than a year. How long has it been, Rosemary? More than a year. A lot of the time the library's been like, we're in Melbourne, you know, we found out about this during lockdown and we were unable to sort of even embark on a testing venture for quite a while. Once we did that, you know, we've started to work through, I guess, some of these issues. But yeah, I haven't had anything come up yet because our library collection wasn't in great use for a lot of the period that we've been working on this. But yeah, so the labeling of the items is one thing. But yeah, I'll have to, like, that'd be something that I would need to deal with, you know, and think about, and I haven't had to do it yet. So yeah, but it will be something I need to do because it most certainly will come up with particularly with the books that are in our rare book collection. Like those are the kinds of things that will be requested at some point. Yeah,
so you need to write a script or something.
I guess so. Yeah.
What's your current policy, Hayley, around glove wearing?
We wear gloves to handle our rare book collection. We wear nitrile gloves.
All the time?
Yes, all the time. Yeah. And with our general collection, this is, you know, this research poses more challenges to our routine practices because we do not wear gloves. And yeah, so we have to think about what to do with that too, but that's sort of a next steps thing. So yeah, I mean, Rosemary's tested our main collection as well as our rare book collection, and yeah, identified different journal runs or yeah, books in our general collection that we would have to think about what to do with. I mean, one option would be we could move things into the rare book collection. That's a much more controlled collection in terms of access and handling and so on. But yeah, for some things that's not going to be feasible, like our 19th century, we've got loads of 19th century journals, not in good condition because they've been bashed about by the scientists, you know, taking them everywhere. Like, you know, Rosemary was saying she thought that maybe something had transferred onto maybe these books or journals from the lab. I can well see that having happened. Like if you see some of these journals, they've definitely seen good use. And yeah, we have not been recommending people wear gloves when handling them. So, but if we can narrow that down to a run and we can label that quite clearly, you know, that it might not be feasible to move it into the rare book collection, probably based on, you know, how much content that might be. But we can probably come up with something, yeah, to mitigate the risks, I think. Yeah.
It might not be feasible for large journal runs, but maybe for individual items, Mylar dust jackets might be a first line of defense, as you know, as well as boxing and labeling and all those things.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think it's really interesting. We've been using nitrile gloves, but it's not very environmentally friendly. But I found a place that actually recycles nitrile gloves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You basically buy a box and it costs a couple $100 and you fill up the box with your used gloves and then you can post it off and they'll recycle the gloves.
Yeah. Although if it's hazardous material, you'd need to be disposing of it in hazardous waste disposal, I guess. I mean, so, but yeah, sure, you could do that for
regular glove use.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, in conservation, we have two disposal pathways. We have a hazard bin for our nitrile gloves that we've used on hazardous items, and we have a recycle bin for the gloves that we just use generally in the collection, with the collections that are not hazardous.
Can I ask a logistics question? When the testing was up and running, how many volume or items were you able to test in a day?
I generally do an afternoon once a fortnight in the library, and I'm probably testing around 30 books I have a bit of a production line going, so I just push them through. But yeah, about 30 in half a day, I think I'm generally doing.
So did you, in terms of your process, did you essentially spot check, so base it on colour first and then pick from there, or did you just sort of pull up a bay at a time and test everything?
When I first started, I based it on colour. I tested everything that was green that I found through the collection. Then as the testing broadened out, when I wanted to look at different colours, I selected, I think it was 2 or 3 bays, and just tested everything, all the different colours that were there, just to see what we could find. My approach in the main library now is slightly different. I'm limiting it to books before 1870, because most of the testing I've done has shown that between 1870 and 1890, it's predominantly lead and chromate. So I'm focusing on the earlier years to try and capture the other heavy metals that are there. And yeah, I'm just looking at every book that is pre-1900.
Did you find, particularly with covers that have faded, if they were harder to identify, but then turned out to be definitely green, but you couldn't tell?
The book I identified yesterday was quite difficult to see. I sort of looked at it and had to hold it under some brighter light to work out that it was actually green. And then I tested it and it turned out to have arsenic in it. So yes, that one was quite difficult. And I think that's because the emerald green does go brown if there's sulphur in the air. And of course, over the last 100 years, there's been plenty of sulphur in the air. So.
Sorry, everyone, I dropped out a little bit there. But is that the end of the questions? Does anybody have any other questions?
If we find something in our collection that matches the publication details of an item that's, say, on the Arsenical Books database, should we take that to mean that that's a very high chance that that book also has arsenic? We should take all those same precautions?
Yes, if it's on the Poison Book Project list and the colour matches, then yes, I would personally make the assumption that that's an arsenic book until I had it tested. Are you aware of the little colour swatch that the Poison Book Project give out?
Yes, I have heard of it and read about it a few months ago.
Yeah, that's another useful way, because it is a very distinctive green as well. And it is, well, I mean, I showed lots of examples, but the majority of like the chromate books are that darker green. So it's quite obvious that they're not emerald green. It does come in quite a range of colours, which makes it more difficult.
Anyone else? No? Okay, well, I think that's it for us today then. I just wanted to say to everyone, Philippa Price, green around the gills, that's funny. I will never lick a book again. Yeah, that I had the same thought, Anna. I was like, oh, shouldn't be licking any of these books, definitely. And tune in for our next event, which is In Conversation with Donald Kerr. So that's happening. All our events are the last Tuesday of every month at 4 o'clock. So next one, we'll see you there, and stay posted to our Twitter account and to the Alia Rare mailing list for more details. Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, Hayley. It's such an interesting topic. You know, won't look at rare books the same way again. I still have comments coming through. Oh, someone's in the beginning of the search for the emerald green. Yeah. Well, now we know there's a lot more to search for, including that red marbling to look out for. So, okay, we'll sign off now. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.